For this lesson, we will be studying the Neolithic Revolution through secondary sources. Now, we have already learned that a secondary source is a piece of evidence created by someone who did not experience the event firsthand or participate in it. And we have to always remember that history is an interpretation of the past. There is no absolute truth, but there are historians' interpretations that change over time and have natural bias based on the historian's own bias and background. As a result, there are multiple historical interpretations of a single period of time, and that's what we're going to look at today. So, an example of that would be for a historical research project, secondary sources are generally scholarly books and articles. They also include dictionaries, encyclopedias, commentaries, etc. Today, we're going to be looking at journal articles. So, start with this question: what is one thing you use in your everyday life that is a secondary source? An example of this is I read Game Informer to see their opinions on video games that have already been created. The video game being the primary source, the article on it being the secondary source. Examining secondary sources. As you analyze secondary sources, you need to know the following according to AP skill number 3. 1. Identify and describe a claim or argument in a text-based or non-text-based source, such as pictures or maps. 2. Identify the evidence used in a source to support an argument. 3. Compare the arguments or main ideas of two sources. 4. Explain how additional evidence or points of view support, modify, or refute a source's argument. The AP exam asks you in multiple choice and short answer sections to be able to identify the author's claim or assess the strength of the claim based on the evidence. You may even be asked to compare two arguments from two different authors, which is something that you're going to be doing today. Some acronyms to be able to understand and analyze secondary sources is what we call our CECE acronym and our optics acronym. CECE is for written text, where optics is for visuals or images. Today, we are only going to be practicing our CECE acronym to be able to identify and understand the secondary sources we are reading. This first C in CECE stands for claim. You want to identify the author's argument in this article. That's the first thing you want to identify. The second thing is explain, where you want to give evidence of the author's claim or his thesis. What does the author use to describe his claim, or how does he make it hold water? Second C, compare the author's argument to other arguments, whether that's an argument to another article, an argument presenting an argument that was a counter argument within the article, or comparing the argument to knowledge that you already know. Then you are going to explain that compared argument using evidence that you already know that's in the article or that's from another article. Okay, so let's get started on that today. We are going to do this first one together. This is from your textbook, pages 11 and 12. If you can't read this screen, you could go ahead and open up your textbook now to page 11 and read this along with me. And after, we are going to identify our CECE acronym. Again, we're looking for the author's claim, the evidence for their claim, then a counterclaim, and the evidence for that counterclaim within the article. We are not going to compare this one to another article. We're just going to compare this to the counter argument that is presented within the actual article itself. This starts with the long quote. We do not want cattle, just wild animals to hunt and water that we can drink. That was the view of Gudu Miha, a prominent member of the Hadza people of northern Tanzania, when he was questioned in 1997 about his interest in a settled life of farming and cattle raising. The Hadza represent one of the very last peoples on earth to continue a way of life that was universal among humankind until 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. In 2014, only about 1,300 survived, and several hundred still made it by living and hunting game, collecting honey, digging up roots, and gathering berries and fruit. Those few lived in quickly assembled grass huts located in small mobile camps averaging 18 people and moved frequently around their remote region. Following animal migrations, almost certainly their way of life is doomed. As farmers, cattle herders, government, missionaries, and other tourists now push them towards extinction. The likely disappearance of their culture is among the final chapters of a very long story in which gathering, hunting, and fishing peoples have been unsuccessful on the defensive against more numerous and powerful neighbors for 10,000 years. So that is one of the modern day hunter-gatherer societies that we're talking about. Now let's actually get into the nitty-gritty of this article. Nonetheless, the way of life sustained humankind for more than 95% of the time that our species has inhabited the earth. During countless centuries, human beings successfully adapted to a wide variety of environments without benefit of deliberate farming or animal husbandry. Instead, our early ancestors wrested a livelihood by gathering wild foods such as berries, nuts, roots, and grain, by scavenging dead animals, by hunting live animals, and by fishing. Known to scholars as gathering and hunting peoples, they were foragers or food collectors rather than food producers. Because they used stone rather than metal tools, they also have been labeled Paleolithic or Old Stone Age peoples. Then, around 12,000 years ago, an enormous transformation began to unfold as a few human species in Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas alike started to practice a deliberate cultivation of plants and the domestication of animals. The agricultural or Neolithic revolution marked a technological breakthrough of immense significance with implications for every aspect of human life. This chapter, then, dealing with the long Paleolithic era, the initial transition to the agricultural way of life, represents most of human history, everything, in fact, before the advent of urban based civilizations, which began 5,500 years ago. So we are starting to see the beginning of their argument in this paragraph here. All right, so they're talking about the importance of the Neolithic period in human history. Okay, so, in that, he specifically states the author argued that the Neolithic period should be considered the foundation of human history in courses due to its importance and its span within history. So you could take something like this that I wrote in this box here. You could also write your own answer for this one. Again, this is us just doing it together so you get an idea of how to do your CECE acronym. So for my claim, I put the author argued that the Neolithic period should be considered the foundation of history and history courses. Let's move on and see what's next in this journal. And yet, history courses and history books often neglect this long phase of the human journey and instead choose to begin the story with the early civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, and elsewhere. Some historians identify real history with writings and so dismiss the Paleolithic and Neolithic areas as largely unknowable because their peoples did not write. Others, impressed with the rapid pace of change in human affairs in more recent times, assume that nothing much of real significance happened during the long Paleolithic era and that no change meant no history. Okay, so right there in this article, we see a counter argument. So again, we want to compare in our CECE acronym the author's main argument to any counter arguments we know of, or articles that are that we have with this secondary source, or your own knowledge. So right now, we're going to compare it to the counter argument that the author presents. The author explained that many history books neglect the significance of the Neolithic period and instead believe that the ancient civilizations such as Egypt should be the foundations of history courses, and that is the counter argument. Now let's see what the author says after that. But does it make sense to ignore the first 200,000 years of human experience? Although written records are absent, scholars have learned a great deal about Paleolithic and Neolithic peoples through material remains, stones, and bones, fossilized seas, rock paintings and engravings, and much more. Archaeologists, biologists, botanists, demographers, linguists, and anthropologists have contributed much to our growing understanding of gathering and hunting peoples and early agricultural societies. Furthermore, the achievements of Paleolithic peoples, the initial settlement of the planet, the creation of the earliest human societies, the beginning of the reflection on the great questions of life and death surely deserve our attention. And the breakthrough to agriculture arguably represents the single most profound transition of human life in all history. The changes wrought by our early ancestors through, though far slower than those of more recent times, were extraordinarily rapid in comparison to the transformation experienced by any other species. Those changes were almost entirely cultural or learned, rather than the product of biological evolution, and they provided the foundation on which all subsequent human history was constructed. Our grasp of the human past is incomplete massively, so if we choose to disregard the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. Again, in this article, he gives a rebuttal to the counterargument and he explains his claim all in this paragraph. So, what I wrote for the author's explanation for his claim. The author argues that the Neolithic period was significant due to its effects on all aspects of human existence. He says, we know this because we've learned a lot from the people's material remains. The earliest accomplishments of the humans should be studied, such as its effect on agriculture, which is considered one of the most transformative events in human history. These achievements were self-learned. Okay, that's his explanation for his claim. We got the explanation for the counterclaim in that same paragraph, and I'll put that there. So my explanation for the counterclaim was seen in the same paragraph that the claim was in, which was this one right here. Okay. He put that other historians believe the Neolithic period shouldn't be the foundation of history because they are unknowable without any writings to analyze. Some believe that no major changes happened during this period because we do not know much about the subject. So that's what the counter argument is. That's the evidence for the counter argument. This is what the main claim is, and that's the counter for the claim. Now you guys are going to try to do this on your own. Okay. So go to the next slide. It says, on your own, you're going to analyze two of the following documents using your CECE acronym. Create a claim of your own with evidence in a written paragraph on the last slide. Turn it in through Google Classroom. So you guys are going to read and analyze this document here using your CECE acronym. If you cannot read the text, go ahead and just click on the link. It'll take you to the actual document. And when you do the compare part, you are going to compare the arguments in actually this document. So you're probably explaining parts of this document in this graphic organizer and parts of this document in the other graphic organizer. Because again, you are reading both these secondary sources and you are comparing them to one another. Okay. You guys could start that on your own. When you're done filling out your CC and all that on both of these articles, comparing them to one another, you are going to pick which argument you think is more relevant. Do you think it was the argument that the Neolithic Revolution was beneficial to humanity or harmful for humanity? And you're going to have to back that up with the evidence you found in these two articles. Okay, so a paragraph is like 3 to 5 sentences. I don't want anything less. I want to be able to understand your argument and why you have that argument. You may start on your own now.